Hello, it's nice to be back. A lot has happened since the last time I was in this theatre. So I'm here to talk about my new book, An Immense World, which is just published today in the UK. I'm very excited. It's about the ways in which animals experience the world around them. And to begin, I'm going to introduce you to one very special animal. This is Typo. He's mine. He's a corgi. He's 1.5 years old. He's Typo normally, and he's typography when he's being bad. He's adorable, and you can see that he's got that herding dog stare. He's got very beautiful eyes that you can't help but miss from a distance. But in front of those eyes is his nose, which is a little easier to miss for us because we are primarily a visual species. Typo is different. The way he mostly interacts with the world is through his nose, through his sense of smell. That's how he explores. He will explore pretty much anything. You put a new object in the home, he will start sniffing it first. When he goes and walks, he sniffs intently and curiously and enthusiastically. His reliance on smell, on olfaction, also boils down to the structure of his nose, his anatomy. This is not Typo's nose. I couldn't get a good photo from the side, but you'll note that a dog's nostrils have these side slits that curve round. Those are important. If a dog is sniffing along a surface, you could imagine that whenever it exhales, it would blow away bits of scented molecules on that surface. Instead, the side slits mean that the air coming out of his nose creates these turbulent vortices that actually sweep odors back into his nose. So regardless of whether Typo is inhaling or exhaling, he's getting a constant conveyor belt of scent wafting inside him. And when I inhale, I get a single stream of air and olfactory cells inside my nose grab molecules from that stream, but mostly it goes into my lungs. When I exhale, I then push out all those odors from my body. When Typo inhales, structures inside his nose split that airstream in two. So one part of it goes into the lungs and is for breathing. The other part goes into his nose and is specifically dedicated for smell. So he's getting a constant conveyor of scent inside his head, and it stays there. It's not expelled with every breath. And that gives him this beautiful, constant, rich array of smelly molecules with which he perceives the world. He does this when we go for walks. 3 times a day, we'll take him for a walk, and at least on one of those occasions, we let him lead the way. He decides what he wants to do on the walk. If he wants to sniff, he gets to sniff, and he always does. These walks are slow. We usually make it around 1 block in the space of half an hour because he's just exploring. He does this with great enthusiasm. He'll sniff new plants that have come out of the ground in spring. He'll sniff bits of fence posts that a dog has recently peed on. From that, watching him, I get to see the world around me that I feel is familiar and mundane changing all the time. These are neighborhoods and streets that I've walked down hundreds of times over before. But when I watch him exploring, I know that that world is changing. It's in constant flux. It moves from one part of the day to the next in ways that is very hard for me to perceive with my eyes, but that is all too evident to his nose. There will be often moments when we're going on a walk, and he will just grind to a halt and start furiously sniffing a patch of pavement that looks completely nondescript to me, to my eyes, but is clearly bursting with exciting scent to him. Through his nose, I see the world around me in a new way. This idea that animals have different sensory experiences of the world was something that a zoologist named Jacob van Uxkol wrote about in the early 20th century. He had a beautiful analogy for this. He talked about each animal as being a house overlooking a garden, and every window of that house corresponded to a different sense in the animal. You might have a sight window or a smell window. All of that would give the animal a certain perspective on the garden outside, but it would only be partial. You don't know the fullness of that garden that's blocked by the walls of the house. You only get what the window allows you to perceive. And you could imagine that other animals or other houses on different sides of this garden, each of them would be looking at the same thing, but get a completely different view of it. This idea of these different sensory experiences is called the Umwelt. This is a word that Jakob von Uexküll popularized. Are there any German speakers here? Great, I'm so sorry. I will butcher the pronunciation of these words repeatedly, so please forgive me. But he used this word, so this word Umwelt means environment in German, but von Uexküll didn't use it to mean an animal's physical environment. He used it to mean the sensory bubble that each species lives in, the specific set of sights and smells and sounds and textures that it could perceive and that other creatures could not. Our senses provide us with an experience of the world that feels complete. It feels total. It feels like we're perceiving all there is to perceive. It doesn't feel like there are gaps in our experience of the world to be filled. But those gaps absolutely exist. All of us, whether a human or a dog, have an incomplete understanding of the space around us. We could all be in the same physical environment and have radically different experiences of it. That's the Umwelt concept. To me, it's incredibly humbling. It means that despite our vaunted intelligence and our technological sophistication, we each are only still perceiving a tiny sliver of the fullness of reality. So, von Uexküll also wrote about the Umwelt of the tick, blood-sucking creature, and the kinds of things that a tick might pay attention to would include the body heat of a human host, the feeling of hair on human skin, the odor of butyric acid, a chemical that's given off by the microbes existing on our skin. Other things that we could pay attention to, most of the things that we can see, the whole visual spectrum from red to violet, would not be part of a tick's Umwelt. It would have a more limited experience of the world. But in our own way, our experience of the world is also limited compared to what other animals can sense. Sea turtles and songbirds can both detect the magnetic field of the Earth. It's as if they have compasses built into their bodies, that they can use this magnetic sense to guide their migrations over long distances. A hatchling turtle diving into the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Florida will do a decade-long clockwise lap of the entire Atlantic. And it knows exactly where to go and where it is along that migration because of its magnetic sense. If you take a baby turtle and expose it to the kinds of magnetic fields it would experience at different waypoints along that journey, it will start swimming in the right direction, even if that turtle has never been in the water before. Rattlesnakes and other pit vipers have two small holes at the front of their heads called pits, and those allow them to sense the body heat of their prey. Even in complete darkness, and even if a rattlesnake was blindfolded, it could detect the infrared radiation given off by a warm-blooded mouse. A blindfolded rattlesnake sitting on my head could sense the warmth of a mouse standing on my fingertip. This beetle can do something similar. It also can detect infrared radiation from a distance, and it uses that to track down the heat of forest fires. The beetle, curiously for an animal, heads in the direction of said fires because a charred forest provides a really nice environment for it to lay its eggs. There are no predators, all the trees are defenseless because they've been severely burned. And so this beetle has evolved ways of detecting fires from afar by sensing the heat that they radiate. Bats have this incredible ability called echolocation. They can navigate through complete darkness, pluck insects out of the air, pluck spiders from their web by using sound and by listening from the echoes that those sounds return. A bat can sometimes call up to 200 times a second, producing extremely high-pitched pulses of ultrasound that we cannot hear. And by listening to how those sounds bounce off the other creatures and the objects in its world, it can sense things as well as a human can in brightly lit environments. We cannot hear these calls, which is extremely fortunate, because they're incredibly loud. Within their frequency range, some bat calls can be as loud as a jet engine. How does the bat stop itself from becoming deaf by its own calls? Every time it calls, it disengages its ears, so basically it shuts down its hearing. And again, it can do this in some species up to 200 times a second. The delay between the sound it produces and the returning echo reveals the distance to its prey. And a bat's nervous system is so sensitive that it could detect differences in echo delay of just 1 or 2 millionths of a second, corresponding to about a millimeter or so distance. It can judge the distance between itself and a flying moth better than we can with our eyes. Dolphins have something similar. They have their own form of echolocation, but because it operates in water, in which sound travels far better than in air, dolphin sonar works over much larger distances. A bat can probably sense a moth flying several feet away from it. A dolphin can sense objects in the water hundreds of meters away. And because of the way sound bounces off objects in the water, a dolphin can use its sonar much like a medical scanner. If this dolphin is echolocating on these two divers right now, it can probably sense the divers' skeletons. If any of them are veterans of war and have shrapnel in their bodies, the dolphin can probably sense that too. It can sense the lungs inside the divers. It can sense the swim bladders that fish use to maintain their buoyancy. Their echolocation is also incredibly precise. It's not just about detecting the vague shape of an object over there. In one amazing experiment, a false killer whale, a related animal called Kina, managed to tell the difference between two hollow metal cylinders that differed in thickness only by the width of a hair. In another experiment, the scientists I talked to said that they gave Kina what they thought were two identical cylinders that they had ordered to be exactly the same size, and the animal told them essentially that they were different. And they went to send the two cylinders back to the manufacturers and realized that one of them had a very small taper in it. And they thought that the things were the same. Their eyes, they looked the same. To the dolphin sonar, they were clearly different. This is a black ghost knifefish. It is an electric fish that produces its own weak electric fields, not enough to shock a human as an electric eel can, but that's not what the fish uses its fields for, not for defense, but not for offense, but for navigation. As the fish swims around its environment, it produces these electric fields, and those fields are then distorted by the objects in the fish's environment, whether it's conductive objects like other animals or plants, or whether they're insulating things like rocks. By sensing these distortions with special receptors in its skin, the fish can also detect the world around it as if it had an extended form of touch that moved, a sort of an omnidirectional sense that moves several inches away from its body. It can then navigate and find prey and so on in water that's too turbid and dark to see. The water actually thrums with a lot of interesting stimuli, and the electric fields of fish are one of them. The trails left behind by fish are another, and that's what this animal, a harbor seal, his name is Sprouts, can detect with these incredible whiskers. The whiskers allow Sprouts to sense the very faint turbulent currents left behind by a swimming fish. It's really hard to imagine that a fish could leave a track, that something like water could hold something as substantial as a trail, but it absolutely can. I watched the scientists who work with Sprouts move a tennis ball attached to a pole through the water, and then sometime later cued the seal to follow them. And he did. And I don't mean he just followed them roughly in the direction that they were moving the ball. He moved in exactly the same path that the ball was taking, up and down, left and right, following it as if it was, as if he was trailing an invisible rope. And that sense, that hydrodynamic sense, is made possible by those incredible whiskers on his face. Even in more familiar senses, the ones that we have and use regularly, mysteries can abound. This is a zebrafinch. Like many birds, its song seems incredibly fast, a little bit too fast to follow. There's always a sense when you listen to these birds that there's something you're not quite getting, some hidden complexity in the song that isn't apparent to our ears. And you'll be right. Like a lot of birds, the zebrafinch's song contains incredibly fast changes in pitch and in volume that the birds, with their much faster hearing, can detect, but that we can't. And it turns out that for many birds, what they're really paying attention to is this very fast temporal flux, these very fast and rapid changes. The things that birders pay attention to, like the syllables that we transliterate birdsong into, a bird like a zebrafinch basically doesn't care about. You could rearrange those in the song, and it doesn't seem to notice or care. You do tiny little changes to small aspects of the song, and they notice. They are clearly listening to their songs in a different way than we are, hearing qualities in the songs that we are missing. It's easy to feel awed by these senses because so many of them are about things that we are missing, things that we can't detect. But even the most incredible senses have important limitations. So the magnetic sense of a turtle operates really well over continental and oceanic distances, but it doesn't work that well over shorter distances because the magnetic field of the planet is just too noisy. It's not as if you had the magnetoreception of the turtle, you'd be able to find your way around a city very easily. The heat sense of a rattlesnake is really good at finding mice in dark conditions. But the perception of the world that the heat sense gives to the rattlesnake is very blurry. This isn't like in sci-fi and sometimes in documentaries, when people try and represent the heat sense of a snake, they use thermal imaging cameras, which just recolor things in the environment in either hot reds or cool blues. Those images are always too sharp. What the snake gets is something much blurrier, much rougher. And as I said, a bat's echolocation is limited by the way sound travels and loses energy in the air. So a bat's echolocation only works over short distances. A bat standing where I am couldn't echolocate a moth flying in the back of the stage, in the studio, for example. For all of these reasons, An Immense World is not a book about super senses. It's not just about valuing the incredible things that animals do when they surpass us. This is not a book about superiority. It's about diversity. It's about the huge amount of difference in the animal kingdom, the variety in the ways that animals experience the world. My contention is that animals aren't interesting only when they surpass us. Sometimes their senses could be inferior to ours, but in a really interesting way. What's that? These are scallops. So for most people, this is how one experiences scallops, these little tasty pucks of flesh on a dish. Scallops are, in fact, animals. Right? Those are the muscles of the scallop, which come inside this beautiful shell. And if you look at the edge of the shell on a living animal, what you'll see are eyes. Dozens of eyes in some species, up to a few hundred in others. And they're really beautiful. They can look like these weird neon blueberries. Why does a scallop need several hundred eyes? What do those eyes see? For a start, the eyes are actually pretty good. They're nowhere near as sharp as a human eye, of course, but they've got reasonably decent optics for an animal this simple. So why does a scallop need 200 good eyes, let alone 200 eyes at all? It's very easy to imagine that this creature gets like a beautiful wraparound view of the world around it. So if a scallop was sitting on this desk, for example, it could see all of you without having to do what I'm doing now. I'm turning my head. That's probably not what it's doing. The analogy I use in the book is that the scallop is like a security guard with a bank of monitors in front of it. Each of the monitors is connected to a very good security camera, and that's the eyes. Each of the eyes is a really good camera connected to the monitor that the scallop's brain, the security guard, is watching. But what the brain sees on those monitors is not like a crystal clear image of the world. It's not the image that the cameras actually can pick up. It's probably just a very simple indicator, like maybe a tick or a color that says something interesting is happening here. It seems that all the eyes are likely doing is telling the scallop to explore a part of the world over there with its other senses, with, say, smell or with touch. So it's a weird system where each eye actually has pretty good spatial resolution, but the animal as a whole probably does not have spatial vision. The scallop is a creature that sees without scenes, and that's very difficult to imagine because it's completely antithetical to what we're doing here. You're looking at me now, I'm looking at you. I see you. Some animals don't do that. They have a very different form of vision. Even with vision, the most familiar of the senses that we have, there could be strange ways in which it plays out in other creatures. Think, for example, about where you can see. I sort of hinted at this earlier. I can see you all very well, and everything else is a bit blurry. If I want to see people sitting over there, I need to turn my head or I need to look. A lot of other creatures don't need to do that. Ducks and many other birds have eyes on the sides of their heads, and they have close to wraparound vision. These ducks sitting on this pond can see the entirety of the sky without needing to move. Think also about the different kinds of things that you can see with your eyes. I can see right in front of me in sharp detail. But I can also see that person over there moving their arm. I can detect movement. I can do all of that with different parts of my same eye. This is a jumping spider. It has split those tasks between different eyes entirely. This big central pair do sharp vision and color vision too. They are very, very good at resolving things in high detail. A small jumping spider, just a few millimeters across, can probably make out the moon in the night sky. But the smaller eyes on either side of them are what do movement. If you block those two small lateral eyes, the jumping spider cannot follow objects moving in front of it. So it has split two tasks that we think of as just part of vision between entirely different organs on its body. Think also about the kind of detail we can see. Like you can see the spider, you can probably read the image credit on the bottom right of this screen, but that's because human eyes are among the sharpest in the animal kingdom. We're exceeded only by some birds of prey. Our eyes are really, really good at resolution. And that means that when we look at other animals, we're getting a very, very different picture of what they themselves are getting. The map butterfly on the left probably can't see those patterns on other map butterflies. And to the eyes of a lion, a zebra just looks like a donkey from most distances. A lion cannot distinguish between the separate black and white stripes at the kinds of distances between me and where you're sitting now. Think also about the colors on animals and in the rest of the natural world. This is a black-eyed Susan. The image on the left shows what it looks like to us. And on the right, it's an approximation of what it might look like to an insect that can see ultraviolets, a part of the spectrum beyond what we can see. Under ultraviolet, flowers like the black-eyed Susan often have distinct patterns, like this bullseye in the center that draws the attention of pollinators that can see in UV. Typo has a different kind of color vision too, as do all other dogs. His is more limited than ours. There is this common misperception that dogs don't see color. In fact, they do. It's just that their palette is much more limited. His rainbow goes from yellow to blue, with some whites and grays in the middle. It doesn't have greens. It doesn't have reds and violets on the margins. You can see that some of his favorite toys, which are bright red, actually really just look muddy yellow. Conversely, there are many, many other animals that can see a much wider range of colors than we can see. And I don't just mean like being able to see things like ultraviolet. Their rainbow isn't just wider at the margins. So our eyes, Typo's eyes, have two kinds of color-sensitive cells, which give him this limited palette. This is also what a lot of colorblind people see. Most people have three kinds of color-sensing cells, cone cells in our eyes, and give us the typical rainbow that we're familiar with. Birds, like this hummingbird, tend to have four. They have an extra cone that is sensitive to ultraviolet, as well as the red, blue, and green that we have. And again, that doesn't just extend their color vision at the margins, it unlocks an entirely new dimension of colors that they can see and we can't. It's likely that I can probably make out just 1% of the colors that a hummingbird can see. The things that might look identical to me, two things that look green, would look startlingly different to this bird. And so it's hard to then imagine what the world looks like to a hummingbird. Certainly, like plants, like the flower that I showed you, will have different patterns on them. The plumage of other birds will have colors and patterns that I'm unaware of. In many birds, the males and females look exactly identical to human eyes, but look very, very different to bird eyes. Even concepts like white can be very different. All white is a color that stimulates all three of my cones equally. If you have a different set of cones, then what's white is going to look pretty different. This mask probably isn't white to a bird. It's really hard to imagine this. And just because of simple maths, I can take any one of the colors that a hummingbird might be able to see and that I can't, and point out things in the world around me that reflect those colors. But I can't do that at scale. I can't do that for all of the, whatever it is, 100 million or so colors that the bird can see, because it just has this extra dimension. It has this extra set of color-sensing cells in its eyes. 4 into 3 just won't go. And there's a limit to how much I can do to recolor my world, much like in the way that a bird can see. This is sort of true for all kinds of animal senses. If I try and think about what it's like to echolocate like a bat, or to sense a magnetic field like a turtle, or to see colors like a bird, there's always going to be a gap, a chasm that I cannot cross. Science and research, and hopefully my book, can take us quite close to the edge of that chasm. But to really cross it, we need feats of imagination. We need these informed, imaginative leaps to get from your subjective experience, to get from your umwelt into that of another creature, requires that kind of effortful work. I can't show you what the world looks like to a hummingbird. You have to try and imagine it for yourself. The American philosopher Thomas Nagel wrote about this very beautifully in his essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, in which he said, you could imagine yourself having a membrane stretched across your wing, across your fingers, and flapping your way through the air. But that doesn't get you even remotely close to what it's like to perceive the world through echolocation. And echolocation is kind of an interesting example of this because it's actually a remarkably easy sense to study. Bats are continuously changing the kinds of sonar pulses that they produce because different kinds of pulses give them different kinds of information about the world. If a bat is searching in open air, it's going to make a different kind of call than if it's trying to pursue a fast-moving insect. And so by recording a bat's call, a scientist can get pretty close to reading the animal's mind. A bat's call reveals the bat's intent. And yet, that subjective chasm remains. The sense of what the bat is experiencing remains this black box, this mystery to us. It's weird then to write a book that's about trying to get people to imagine the worlds of other animals when that act is fundamentally unachievable. But I think that there's something beautiful about the attempt. There's something really worthwhile in trying a task that you know you will never entirely succeed at, but is worth trying nonetheless. Why is it worth trying? Well, I'll give you 4 reasons. Firstly, we start seeing interesting sides to animals that we never knew were there. Mice and rats and many other rodents communicate with ultrasound. They make high-pitched squeaks that they can hear and humans cannot. Bats probably can, we can't. A lot of this was discovered in the 70s. And even then, even only more recently did we understand that, for example, courting mice will sing to each other and duet to each other in ultrasound that we can't hear. These are some of the most familiar and most best-studied animals on the planet. They've been part of scientific research for decades. And it's interesting to me that for all that time, people were completely oblivious about the communications that these creatures were going through beneath the threshold of their hearing. When we taste food, because we're a sort of medium-sized animal, food is something that we put in our mouths, and taste is equivalent to, we equate taste with ingesting something. But if you're very small, like a fly, food, like this apple, can be something that you stand on. And so many insects, like flies, have taste receptors in their feet. A fly landing on a piece of food is already tasting it without having to do anything with its mouth. Crocodiles look like armored, insensitive tanks. This is not a creature that you would associate with sensitivity, with gentleness. And yet, in small bumps arrayed all along its mouth, it has exquisitely sensitive touch sensors that are about as sensitive as human fingertips are. It's with these that crocodiles can detect the faint ripples produced by animals coming to drink at a waterside, even if the creature itself is submerged. And crocodiles turn out to be paragons of sensitive touch, despite their appearances. The second reason, I think, to care about Umwelten, about the experiences of other animals, is that they show us ways of thinking about the world in new ways. They show us sides to the world that we miss. I've already said that when I go for walks with Typo, by watching the way he sniffs, I come to appreciate how constantly changing the streets around me are, how the places that I think of as mundane and boring take on new and exciting airs when I see how he explores them with fresh intensity every time. The surface of the ocean is often described as featureless, and clearly there's really not much here in the way of landmarks. But to the nose of a seabird, like an albatross, there is topography. There are mountains of scent and valleys of lack of scent that indicate where food might be, patches of krill and other sustenance in the midst of this landscape that seems completely devoid of feature. This is an elephant hawk moth. It's a beautiful insect that's incredibly colorful. And what's notable about this thing is that it can sense those same colors in the very blackness of night. To us, night is black and white. Our color vision fails once light goes beyond a certain threshold. But this moth can keep on seeing colors. It can tell the difference between different flowers, even when all the lights have gone out. To the moth, night isn't a realm of blackness. It's a realm that's still bursting with color. This is not a trick question. What is this? Okay, this is a trick question. Is it cold? It is cold to us, but there are animals that wouldn't find ice cold. The reason we think it's cold is we have special receptors in our skin that are sensitive to painful cold, that is cold beyond below a threshold that would cause us harm. So ice is frozen, and to us, ice is freezing. But a lot of fish don't have those receptors. They have no concept of what it would be like to be painfully cold. So a cod sitting in like the seas of Antarctica isn't sitting there shivering in pain. It's fine because it has no concept of what painful cold might be like. To it, ice, still frozen, but not freezing. This is a tree hopper, one of many quite cute insects that abound on the plants around us. If you have ever been in a park or a garden or any kind of green space, you will absolutely have sat next to a tree hopper without knowing it. So these insects are very much a part of your lives, even if you didn't know that they exist. This entire family is very good at sending messages through plants. They vibrate their bodies and create seismic signals that move along the stems and leaves of plants and that could be picked up by other tree hoppers sitting on the plants. These vibrational signals are very different to the audible signals or sounds that move through the air. For a start, they're not tied to the insect's size. In the air, a small creature tends to produce a much higher pitched noise than a large creature. A mouse squeaks, an elephant bellows. But when you're sending those same signals through a surface, like through a plant, that relationship between size and frequency breaks down. And so a creature like this can produce a sound, that a signal that if you turn into audible sound, sounds deep and resonant. I've heard tree hoppers produce things like sound like a lion purring rather than a house cat. Their sounds can also be melodic. They can be very unusual. If you transform their vibrational signals into sounds we can hear, what you get is something that's entirely unlike what an insect might sound like. It's not the chirp of a cricket. It can be melodic. It can sound like a musical instrument, like monkeys hooting, like bird song. They're really beautiful. And so the plants around us, in our gardens, in our parks, are full of these vibrational choruses that we can't hear. We can see the colors of the plants around us. These flowers and all other flowers, if you could ask what kind of eye is best suited to seeing the colors of the flowers around us. And if you look at those colors and run that experiment, what you get is an eye that is remarkably like the eye of a bee. A bee has 3 color-sensing cells, much like ours, sensitive to green, blue, and ultraviolet. And it turns out to be the kind of perfect eye for discriminating between all the colors of a floral meadow. So you might think then that the bee evolved an eye that was really good at seeing flowers. And in fact, it's the other way around. The bee came first, the flowers came later. Flower colors, then, evolved to ideally tickle the eyes of insects. And this is a theme that runs throughout the book. We sometimes think of the senses as like passive receptacles for the information around us. Our eyes absorb light, sound goes into our ears. But the senses aren't passive. By seeing the world, by sensing the world, we also influence it. Eyes are like living paintbrushes. They also create the palette that they then sense. So the senses create the world around us, but we humans are now reshaping that world in ways that make no sense for a lot of other animals. And so reason 3 for paying deeper, for appreciating and trying to think about the Umwelt and around us is that I think it makes our responsibilities to the planet much clearer. We have filled the world with light and with sound in places and at times where it doesn't belong. Light at night is now a huge problem for the planet and for many of the animals around us. We don't think of light as a pollutant. We don't think of it in the same way as like chemicals billowing out from a smokestack or plastic gathering on a beach. But it can be just as harmful. Turtle hatchlings that hatch next to a brightly lit beachfront will often head towards that beachfront instead of into the sea. They'll often do that with fatal results. They'll get hit by traffic. They'll wander into buildings. They'll die under artificial lamps. Pollinating insects will often be lured away from the plants that they're meant to service by artificial lights at night. And we humans gain a much reduced appreciation for the world around us. Many people, perhaps many of you in this room, have never really experienced genuine night because so many of us live under light-polluted skies. What we can think of as darkness isn't really that dark. I've been to places where light has been truly switched off or changed to colors that don't affect our vision as much. And in one such field trip, I looked up and saw the Milky Way, this arm of our galaxy coursing through the sky above me, a sight that I've never seen before in the Northern Hemisphere, and that we should be able to see. If light is a problem, so is too much sound. Sound, in the same way as light pollution, can also push animals out of habitats that would be great for them. It can drown out the alarm calls and the courtship songs that they need to hear, the sounds of predators, of prey, of peers calling to one another that bind the natural world together. Sensory pollution, then, is the pollution of disconnection. It's stimuli that we have put into the world that severs animals from each other and that severs us from our relationships with them and from the cosmos. We drive animals away because of the brightly lit nature of our settlements, because of the noisy nature of our world. We drown out their presence. In the early years of the pandemic, many people talked about how they suddenly heard birds, a lot more birds than they were used to. People joked that nature is healing. The reason people heard more birds was that the world was a bit quieter. And when the world is quieter, you hear more, and you hear more over longer distances. Nature feels a bit closer, something a bit less distant. I think for a lot of people, nature ends up being like this. Something remote and grand, a landscape very far away from our lives. But I think if you think about the umwelt of other creatures, about their sensory worlds, then it's a reminder that nature is very close to us. It's in our backyards. It exists in the wilds of perception, in the interactions between my dog and this crow that he has taken a liking to. They sense the world in completely different ways. And by thinking about their senses, his sense of smell, the bird's tetrachromatic vision, I can go on grand adventures without ever having to move. Marcel Proust wrote about this, about how the greatest journeys were not actual acts of physical travel, but thinking about the world through the senses of the other creatures around us. Their senses remind us that wilderness exists in our backyards, that it is not distant, that we are continually immersed in it, and it is there for us to imagine, to savor, and to protect. This is a gift, and it's a gift that is possibly uniquely human. Of all the creatures that I've showed you in this talk, the rattlesnake, the dolphin, the bat, my dog, I think it's likely that we're the only ones that actually can think about the senses of other creatures, that know that the umwelt exists, that know that our experience of the world are radically different. And to be clear, there's been a long legacy of people making big claims of what humans can do and other animals can't do. But I think this is a fair one to make. Understanding the sensory worlds of other animals is something that took centuries of philosophy and experimentation for humans to grapple with, and that many people today still don't really think about. This ability to dip into the sensory worlds of other creatures is our supersense. It is a gift and one that we must cherish. When we interact with animals, I can think about what this owl is sensing, and the owl probably doesn't care. But in doing this, in trying to take the perspective of another creature, in trying to perform this radical act of empathy, I feel my understanding for other creatures grow. I feel my understanding of the world around me grow and broaden and deepen. And that's the experience I want for readers of this book. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. The wonderful Ed Yong, everybody.